Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, television, books, and in popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to another show. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I am joined by my co-host and producer, Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how you doing this week?
I'm doing really good, Bruce. Looking forward to today. How's everything going with you?
Things are going well. Normally, we begin the program with some relatively trivial banter. I mean, not completely trivial, but relatively trivial. This time we're going to skip that because we want to get to really a very special guest joining us, and I want to give him as much time as we can. So joining us this week in the gallery is filmmaker, writer, producer, and all-around horror expert, Sam Irvin. Sam has worked on an incredible array of films during his career, from directing cult classics like Elvira's Haunted Hills to generally deep knowledge and passion for horror and classic cinema. Sam's also an author, historian, storyteller with a treasure trove of behind-the-scenes insights, and he has been nominated for a 2025 Rondo Award for Best Graphic Arts Presentation, and that's for his new book. It is called Captain Samoflauge and the Frankensam Scam. Sam, it's a real pleasure to have you. Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, for those who are watching the video presentation that we do on YouTube, are you dressed as Captain Samoflauge?
I am. I was going to say, you don't even have Sam Irvin in the studio today. You actually have his alter ego, the queerdo superhero known as Captain Samoflauge. And the book that you
Really?
mentioned that's up for a Rondo Award is my origin story, and it's a parody of a little golden book with lots of little illustrations and everything, and it's a parody about me. I actually play three characters in this book. I play director Sam, who is making a movie called Wham Bam Frankensam. I am also starring as Frankensam in my own movie and playing the monster in the green monster makeup. And the producer, who looks suspiciously like Peter Lorre, wants to bury the movie and take a tax write-off, kind of like a certain person at Warner Brothers of recent with Batgirl and some other things. Little inspiration there. And I need to save my movie from being, shelved. So I conjure up my alter ego superhero to save the day. And that's what this whole story is all about.
Oh, it's
Very
so
nice.
cool.
Would you say this is a graphic novel then?
Yeah, I mean, it's not it's short. It's like a little golden book. So novel kind of sounds a little bit longer than a little bedtime storybook, but yes, and the category I'm in
Yeah.
sort of covers graphic novels and comics, and also even the it's kind of an all-encompassing category. It also covers artist collection books, like if it's just an art book. So, yeah, I've got a lot of
Yeah.
competition because there's so many different types of books that are kind of squeezed into that category.
Sam, did you both write the story and do the artwork as well?
No, I wrote the story, and I work with an artist named Dan Gallagher, who has illustrated a couple of other books of mine. And he's my partner in crime when it comes to caricature cartoons, and he gets all of my humor and draws the funniest pictures of me. And I just absolutely adore him. And so yes, he's spectacularly great, and I'm really lucky to have him.
Yeah.
And by the way, the name of your broadcast, The Ghostly Gallery, is comes from that Alfred Hitchcock book that I had as a child. It came out in like 1961 or 62, and I was like 5 or 6 years old. And
Mhm.
it's a seminal influence on me, that boy sitting up in the bed with Alfred Hitchcock's big face and the headboard carved into the headboard. And when you flip around to the back cover where the artwork continues, there's a chair with Alfred Hitchcock's face carved in that. Well, we do. I mean, I just think that's it's such a
Yeah.
haunting thing from my childhood that in this book, um, we do an homage to that. And when Captain Samoflauge is coming down the stairs of the lair where the
Nice.
Peter Lorre producer is, I have a chair with Peter Lorre's face engraved, carved into the back of the chair, just like
Nice.
Hitchcock. And so when I saw the name of your show, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to be on there.
We're so glad you are.
You're the only the second guest we've ever had. Yeah. You're
No
only the
way,
second guest
really?
we've ever had that put that connection together. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No,
You
I
and a guy named William Sandell, who has done a lot of work on films. You know William?
huh. I don't. I know of him a little bit, but I have never met him.
Yeah. Yeah, he's
Well,
done a
no,
lot
it's
of designing sets and yeah.
yes.
And
No,
he
that's
loves
it's
those books.
yeah,
He
that
has
book.
all of them.
Well, that book just, I read it over and over, but the images, I I remember those images. They're just seared into my brain. They were very, very spooky and haunting, and
Yeah.
one of the many, childhood
Yeah.
influences that made me into a monster kid. And you're just so impressionable at those young ages, and that was definitely one of the things that was very influential.
Absolutely. The first book I got was Haunted Houseful, and the second one was Ghostly Gallery. My parents bought them for me when I was very young, maybe 7, 8 years of age,
Yeah,
and I still have them to this day. Absolutely love them.
that's great.
Well,
Yeah, I've
Sam,
got
you've
mine upstairs.
had an absolutely fascinating career. Yeah. Your career in the world of horror and filmmaking is just remarkable. Let's talk about how you first fell in love with cinema in general, and then what led you to pursue a career in filmmaking. Where'd all this start for you?
Well, I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, and my dad owned movie theaters. And so that was my playground after school. I would go to the theater and hang out and watch whatever they were showing. And when I was 5 years old, still in kindergarten, my when my sisters would babysit me, they would bring me to the theater. And the first horror film I ever remember seeing was in 1961 at age 5, first run, The Pit and the Pendulum, starring Vincent Price, the Roger Corman film. And it just completely blew me away. I fell in love with horror. I fell in love with Vincent Price, and it just went from there. When I was um, I also watched Shock Theater on Saturday afternoons after American Bandstand, and they would show all the classic Universal horror movies from the 30s, and that's where I got introduced to my all-time favorite film, which is The Bride of Frankenstein, and that was a huge influence on me. And later, of course, many decades later, I was very proud and thrilled to be one of the executive producers of Gods and Monsters, which was an Academy Award winning film starring Sir Ian McKellen as James Whale, the director of Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, The Old Dark House, etc. And there's a scene in the movie that's a flashback of him directing on the set of The Bride of Frankenstein in the laboratory. And we not only, I made sure that the set was recreated exactly to look exactly like the original, I said laboratory, but the laboratory set. And and we found some of the original electrical equipment that was used in those early Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein movies designed by Kenneth Trickfadden. So it was really, really special. Made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And it was just an amazing full circle with that. But going back, when I was 8 years old in 1964, my dad and our family took a cross country road trip to see all the sights out west, like, the Grand Canyon and Las Vegas and whatnot. And we went to Hollywood. And because of my dad's connections in the movie business, he got a VIP tour at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank. And I walked onto the set. Again, I'm 8 years old, and I walk onto the set of Blake Edwards' The Great Race, and they're shooting a scene in a giant tank of water with an iceberg that has two antique cars on it and four actors: Natalie Wood, Jack Lemmon, Tony Curtis, and Peter Falk. And there are wind machines and snow machines and wave machines. And literally, the eyes popped right out of my freaking head. I could not believe that all this was being created in a movie studio. I thought if they needed to shoot a scene like that, they had to go to the North Pole and wait for a storm. And it completely warped my brain. And from that moment on is when I wanted to direct movies. And that same day I saw them do a forced perspective shot of Jack Lemmon. Jack Lemmon was playing the villain, Professor Fate, and it was his lair. And it looked like an Addams Family kind of house up on a little hill. And this was just a model of a house. It was about 6 feet tall. I remember that because there were workers that were up there, like, adjusting the chimney or whatever, and the house was about as tall as a full-grown man. And it was on this hill that they, just a pile of dirt that they had put into the studio. And then down in the foreground was a full-size sidewalk and fence and gate where the actors would enter. And I just was looking at it and I was like, this isn't going to look right. That looks like a model. But of course, when you see the film, the illusion works perfectly. And it absolutely looks like that's a full-size house way in the distance. And and then I also went on the set of Two on a Guillotine, which was a thriller with Cesar Romero. It was actually written for Vincent Price, but he was unfortunately not he was under contract to American International Pictures and was doing all the Poe movies. And so Warner Brothers ended up casting Cesar Romero instead, and it also had Dean Jones and Connie Stevens. Well, I saw a scene that they were doing with Dean Jones and Connie Stevens inside this gondola bubble ride that actually existed in those days out in Santa Monica, the ocean. And this gondola kind of chairlift sort of thing would go way out over the water and come back. And it was just a little tourist attraction. Well, we had actually gone on that like the day or two before. And here I'm seeing it being recreated on a soundstage that had the gondola sliced in half, and they're sitting in there, and there's rear screen projection behind them where they had gone out to the real location and shot footage to put on the screen. So anyway, the whole day was like literally having a magician teaching you all the tricks of the trade of how these illusions were done. And so, yeah, I just wanted to direct from that moment on. My dad had an 8 millimeter home movie camera. I literally just took it out of his hand and never gave it back. And when I got home, I started making little Dracula movies with my brother, and it just went from there. Then a little bit later, when I was in junior high school, my teacher wanted us to learn monologue. Monologue was the assignment. And she's thinking, Shakespeare or something like that. And I'm allergic to iambic pentameter. So I suggested, could I do Edgar Allan Poe? And she said yes. So I raced home. Now, this is the late 60s. And this is long before home video or anything like that. But I recorded the audio on reel-to-reel tape recorder of every horror film that would get played on television. And by then, The Pit and the Pendulum had played on TV, and I had the whole entire movie on the audio reel-to-reel tape. And I went down to the Vincent Price's monologue at the climax, and I transcribed it, back and forth, back and forth. And finally, in the process of transcribing it, I was learning it, and I went in the next day and I did, do you know where you are, Bartolome? You're about to enter hell, the neverworld, the infernal region, the abode of the damned, a place of torment, Gehenna, Naraka, the pit, and the pendulum, the razor edge of destiny. Thus the condition of man, bound on an island from which he can never nor hope to escape, surrounded by the waiting pit of hell, which must destroy him finally. And I got an A. The teacher, I didn't really tell the teacher that the words were written by the screenwriter, Richard Matheson, and not Edgar Allan Poe. The teacher might have known that, but looked the other way. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is because in 1970, when I was 13, or 13 or 14, I guess I was just turning 14, Vincent Price was playing Fagin in a production of Oliver on stage, and it was being performed in Atlanta, Georgia, which was a 4-hour drive from my home in Asheville, North Carolina. Well, I held a gun to my mother's head and said, you have to drive me down there and we have to see the show because I need to not only see Vincent Price on stage, but I need to go to the stage door and meet him. So we went, saw the show. He was great. We went to the backstage. There were several fans waiting to see him. And when it was my turn, I showed him, first of all, I introduced myself as Sam Irvin, and he goes, "Oh, you mean like Senator Sam Irvin from North Carolina?" And I go, "Well, he spells it Ervin. I spell it Irvin, but it's pronounced the same way." Well, Sam Irvin was a very famous Democrat senator who'd been a senator forever, and would in a couple of years become the head of the Watergate investigation committee and all that stuff. And he was very well known at that time. Well, my name made an immediate impression on Vincent, which helped him remember me. Then I showed him a flyer that I had designed when I was 11, when I had actually organized Saturday morning matinees of a Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe retrospective, where we would show each week. We'd showed House of Usher, and then Pit and the Pendulum, and then The Haunted Palace, and all of them. And I had created this flyer with the calendar and cut out from the press books the ads for each one. And I showed him this calendar and explained that this is what I was doing at my dad's theater. And he couldn't believe this young kid was, so precocious. And then I said, and by the way, I do know your monologue at the climax of Pit and the Pendulum. And he says, you do not. And I go, oh, yes, I do. And I went into it and did the whole thing. And the other fans who were standing around, they applauded at the end. And so, yeah, I really made an impression on Mr. Price that day. About a year later, he was doing a lecture tour series, and I got my mother to take me to that again. It was in Charlotte or somewhere else in somewhere in North Carolina, and went back to the stage door that time. And as soon as Vincent saw me, he said, "Sam, what are you doing here?" He remembered me instantly. And then he turned to the people in line and said, "This young man knows my monologue from Pit and the Pendulum." And I was like his little wind-up performing monkey. And I did it for everybody. I got applause and everything. So we were already developing this sort of, oddball, super fan friendly, relationship. Then in 1974, when I was 17, going on 18, by then I was doing a fanzine on horror films called Bizarre. And for a high school graduation present, I got my parents to send me to London because I wanted to interview all of my especially my Hammer film idols like Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and all of those great people. And so I ended up on this particular day. Christopher Lee invited me to come to this Pinewood Studios to spend the day with him on the set of The Man with the Golden Gun, the James Bond movie where he was playing the villain, the man with the golden gun. And I spent the whole day with Christopher Lee, rode back to London in a limo with him and Hervé Villachez, who was playing his sidekick. I got to meet Roger Moore, the whole 9 yards. And you would think that would be enough for a fanboy for one day. But no, I decided that night I was going to go to see Diana Rigg on stage in the West End in Pygmalion, where she was playing the lead, Liza Doolittle. And I was a huge fan of her, Diana Rigg, from playing Emma Peel on the Avengers TV series. She was also the Bond girl in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but she was Vincent Price's daughter in Theater of Blood, which was one of my all-time favorite films.
Yeah.
And I sit down in the theater, I hear this familiar laugh, I turn around, and it's frickin' Vincent Price. And he goes, "Sam, what are you doing here?" And I tell him that I want to meet Diana Rigg. And he says, "Oh, well, you're coming backstage with me afterwards." And he takes me back. He introduces me to Diana Rigg. And he says, "This young man knows my monologue from the Pendulum." And he makes me do it for Diana Rigg. And she got a big kick out of it. Now, I know this is incredibly long-winded, but I have to go full circle. Now, flash forward many, many years, I ended up becoming very close friends with Vincent. We almost even became intimate at one point. But I was friends of his all the way till he died in 1993, I guess it was. In the late 90s, a few years after he'd passed away, I got a call from Cassandra Peterson, who is Elvira. And she was interviewing directors for her second Elvira film. And she asked me to come up and have a meeting with her at her house. So I went there and she hands me the script and she goes, "Now, this is Elvira's Haunted Hills. It's a spoof of The Pit and the Pendulum and the other Vincent Price Poe movies. Are you familiar with those?" And I go, "Do you know where you are? You are about to enter hell, hell, no, neverworld." I go through the whole monologue and she's cocking her head slowly to the left the whole time I'm doing it, looking at me like I'm completely nuts. And I'm waiting for her to call security. But I'd finished the monologue and she just points at me and she goes, "You're hired." And that's how I got the job to direct Elvira's Haunted Hills. And can you believe,
Wow.
I mean, literally, I was born to make that movie. And with Pit and the Pendulum being the first horror movie I ever saw, and then to all those decades later be able to spoof it and actually build and design the sets to replicate it exactly. We had the gears for the pendulum exactly the same, and the blade and everything. We matched it all perfectly. I mean, it was just an absolute dream come true. And now you can get it word in edgewise.
Amazing stuff.
I'll
Yeah. Oh, hey, I don't mind listening. The stories are great. Obviously, you and Vincent Price hit it off terrifically. You become very good friends. Tell us about his personality. What kind of a guy was he like?
Well, he was just such a gentleman and so incredibly kind, and he treated all of his fans wonderfully. He would write beautiful letters with his beautiful handwriting and send autographed pictures and things. He had just such a wonderful sardonic sense of humor. Gosh, I just absolutely adored him. I developed in early part of my career, I started out after I graduated from college as Brian De Palma's assistant on The Fury and Dress to Kill and some others. And right around that time, I was just dying to become a director. And I was developing a project that was going to star Vincent and his wife, Coral Brown. And it was scripted. I had hired the screenwriter Brian Clemens, who actually created and wrote the Avengers television series starring Diana Rigg as Emma Peel. And he had written and directed Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter for Hammer Films. He had written the screenplay to Golden Voyage of Sinbad. He wrote the screenplay to Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. He was, very, very big in the genre in those days. And the film I was going to do was a dead body comedy. And we desperately, I got very close to getting it financed, but being a first time director, et cetera, it just didn't get off. It ultimately didn't get off the ground. But in working on it and developing it and going through various drafts of the script and everything, I really became very close friends with Vincent. And he had me come stay with him for a weekend when he was in Westport, when he was performing his one man show of Oscar Wilde. And that was the weekend where things got, little intimate, and I could tell that he, wanted it to go a little further than I was ready for. um, but I write about all of this in my book. I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter: How I Met Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and more. It's a coming of age
Wow.
memoir, and so if you wanted all the details of that weekend, it's there. but um, but we remained incredibly close friends. And when my first feature as a director came out, it was called Guilty as Charged. And it starred Rod Steiger as a madman who kidnapped murderers and fried them on his own electric chair. And it opened in Los Angeles in 1992, I guess, 91 or 92. And it got a rave review from Kevin Thomas in the Los Angeles Times. And it compared Rod Steiger's performance to Vincent Price in Theater of Blood, which was the greatest sentence that had ever been written by a critic that for me that could possibly have been written. Um, and and after I read that review in the paper in the morning, about an hour later, I got a call from Vincent, and he said, "Sam, I saw the review. I'm so proud of you, and I can't believe they compared him to me in Theater of Blood." And I said, "Oh, Vincent, it's playing near you in Westwood. Let me come and pick you up, and we'll go see it. I would love for you to see the film." And he said, I can't, I'm incapacitated now, I'm bedridden. And it was just it was so sad. But we talked for a while on the phone. And then a few days later, I got this incredibly beautiful letter. And he said, I just can't believe how far you've come after all these years of having met you when you were just a little boy. And it was just the most beautiful letter, which I quote in full in this book and actually show you the letter. Um, his handwriting was so beautiful, but now because he was incapacitated and his health was failing, it was the writing, the lines were just a little crooked, and it just was so sad. And but at any rate, he, that was the last communication I had, was that letter, and then he died not long after that. But God, I'm getting choked up. He just meant so much to me. Um, but that's the kind of man that he was. He loved people, and I just couldn't speak highly enough of him. Now, Cassandra Peterson also got to know him well as friends, and um, and she had actually tried to cast him in her first movie, Elvira's Haunted Hills. But he was getting up there in age, and his health wasn't great, and it just didn't work out for her either. Well, we decided with Elvira's Haunted Hills that we were going to dedicate the film to him, and so we did.
Oh, nice. Oh my goodness. He sounds like he would have been such a special individual. I mean, his movies were fantastic. Just
Yes.
fantastic.
Any film that had Vincent Price, no matter how mediocre the script might have been or anything else, he just elevated anything he was in, and he had just such an amazing star quality and presence. And I just, I anytime one of his films comes on, I'm there. I just absolutely love all of his movies.
Oh my goodness. You mentioned that you had an opportunity to chat with other, you know, legends of film, and you had chatted with Christopher Lee. What was he like?
He was great. It was interesting. I had first started corresponding with him through the mail, and I interviewed him with a questionnaire through the mail for my fanzine. And when I found out that my parents were going to actually send me to London, I wrote to him telling him I was coming over, and he was so nice. He immediately wrote back and said, "Here's my phone number. When you get to town, call me and we'll go have lunch." And then I did, and he said, "Unfortunately, I'm working. Do you mind coming out to Pinewood Studios for lunch?" And I'm like, "Hell no!" And it turned out to be the Bond picture. Well, when I got there, he's very tall. I forget, he's like at least 6'4". But and I'm 6 feet, and I was already full grown at that time. I was like 17 or 18. Um, but when I met him, he had already shot some scenes in the morning for the film and was in costume and everything. I could swear he was wearing lifts in his shoes because he literally just absolutely towered over me. He was so tall. So that was the first impression that I had, was how tall he was, but I suspected it was enhanced. And then he he gave me a tour of the Bond sets while the other people, he got broken for lunch early. We had lunch by ourselves in the commissary at Pinewood. And then and I interviewed him again while I was there with my tape recorder. And then at the end of lunch, the other actors, Roger Moore and everybody, they were broken for lunch, and they came and they were going to be lunching for an hour. So he said, "Let me just give you a tour of the sets." And I'm like, "Great." Well, he's taking me around, and we end up finally, after looking at a whole bunch of sets, we end up at his lair, which his character name was Scaramanga, and it was this incredible living room that was supposedly built in the rocks of Phuket Island in Thailand. And so, the set had these giant boulders on the walls that were kind of coming into the living room. And it was incredible. Well, we're walking through this sort of foyer, and lined on the walls were hundreds of dead butterflies that were pinned as a collection of butterflies behind glass. And I said to Christopher, I said, "Are all these butterflies real?" And he turns to me and he goes, "Sam, this is a James Bond film, not a Hammer film." and the and the way he said, "Not a Hammer film," was he just was like so disdainful of the whole idea that he had lowered himself to be in all of those horror pictures. And he didn't like the word horror either. But anyway, it was, I was catching him at a moment when he had gotten a huge break to be the villain in a James Bond movie. And that's what he wanted. He wanted more than anything to work with the big directors on A-list, big budget movies. And by God, he did. Look at what he accomplished. He not
Mhm.
only did the James Bond film, but the Three and Four Musketeers for director Richard Lester with an all-star cast. He was in, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes for Billy Wilder. He was in 1941 for Spielberg. Then he was in Star Wars movies for George Lucas, and in The Lord of the Rings for Peter Jackson, and in Hugo for Martin Scorsese, and the list and Tim Burton used him in
Mhm.
things. The list goes on. So he accomplished his goal, but he kind of, depending on who he was talking to, he would sometimes talk endearingly about Hammer films and the horror films that he had done in his early days. But most of the time, he kind of sneered at them a little bit. But the irony of it all is that all of those great directors that I mentioned who hired Christopher Lee only hired him because they were super fans of his Hammer films and him playing Dracula and all of the monsters that he did and whatnot. So anyway, that was kind of his personality. He was a little bit snooty about his Hammer days. Peter Cushing was just the opposite. Peter Cushing was happy as a clam to be a big fish in the niche market of those horror films, and loved doing them, and loved the fact that he was a top billed major star in that realm. And Cushing did, go on. He was in Star Wars, for heaven's sakes, and was one of, he and Alec Guinness were the two highest paid actors in that movie because at that time Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill were unknowns. They were practically getting paid scale. But so he did some bigger films. He did Top Secret and some other, big Hollywood movies and stuff. But he was just very, very happy and always talked lovingly of his Hammer film days. And so that was kind of the difference between the two. But they were both great gentlemen. Peter Cushing, especially, just an incredibly sweet gentleman. And just I absolutely adored both of them.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I've always been curious about what different people were like, especially, the classic actors like, Vincent Price. I mean, they hold a special place. So to hear firsthand accounts, I just think that's spectacular. So thank you.
Absolutely. I just feel so blessed that I was able to meet the big three, who were working at that time, and to actually interview them and get to know them when they were still in the game, not 20 years later looking back or whatever. The stories they were telling me would be, oh, last month I did this, and next month I interviewed Peter Cushing several times, but the time that I actually got to meet him finally in person was at the 1975 Famous Monsters Convention in November of 75. Well, he started shooting Star Wars about 6 months later in the spring of 76. So, I'm catching him, really as his career, was at his peak.
Mm-hmm. Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Sometimes you meet your heroes and they don't disappoint you. Sometimes they're everything they thought you'd be, or you thought they would be. And that seems to have been the case, especially with Cushing and Price. I want to ask you, Sam, about working with Brian De Palma. This was one of your early projects. You were his assistant on Dressed to Kill. Now, first of all, Brian De Palma is one of my favorite directors of all time. And of all his films, Dressed to Kill is my favorite. So I'm very envious of this experience that you had. So you got a chance to be there. Michael Caine, Nancy Allen, whom I fell in love with, even though I was quite a bit younger at that time. Angie Dickinson, Dennis Franz is in the movie.
Yep.
Do you have a favorite story or maybe a couple of stories from that time on Dressed to Kill?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I was just mentioning that Famous Monsters Convention in November of 1975. Well, literally, I was in my sophomore year freshman year at University of South Carolina, and I had seen two Brian De Palma films, Phantom of the Paradise and Sisters, and I absolutely went bonkers over them. I thought they were the most incredible things, and I thought Brian De Palma was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I had already been elected president of the student union movie theater that was run on campus. And we, the little committee and everything, we were the ones that chose the movies that were going to be shown and organized different programs and stuff. And I decided I'm doing a Brian De Palma Film Festival. And everybody's like, who's Brian De Palma? And I'm like, well, let me just show you. And so we booked Phantom of the Paradise and Sisters and a couple of his earlier films, Greetings and Hi Mom, both with Robert De Niro and his early career, etc. And I just decided I was going to try to get in touch with him. Well, how do you get in touch with somebody? Especially back in those days. Well, my dad, because of being in the movie theater business, subscribed to all the trade papers like Variety and Hollywood Reporter, etc. And I found in Hollywood Reporter in the production charts a listing for a film called Carrie that was in early stages of pre-production, and they gave a phone number for the casting office. I called the phone number, and lo and behold, Brian De Palma was there. He was on a break. They put him right on the phone. I explained what I was doing, asked him if he would come to South Carolina for this festival, and he said yes. He said, no one's ever done anything like that. Um, so I had him, we had a little budget and everything. We flew him out, we put him up in a hotel and everything. I took him to film classes, and he was storyboarding on the chalkboard his current film that he had just finished and was editing, called Obsession, that starred Cliff Robertson and John Lithgow and Genevieve Bujold. And he brought with him these cassette tapes of the score that had just been recorded for Obsession by, a fairly well-known composer named Bernard Herrmann, who only did, Psycho and Citizen Kane, etc. But it also previously scored Sisters for Brian. And he played, for the first time being heard by anybody, several of the cues from Obsession, and showing us with storyboard drawings on, what the scenes were and everything. It was absolutely incredible. So, so I got to know him, and this happened 3 days after the Famous Monsters Convention in November of 1975. I literally got back to school, and from the festival that had happened on the weekend, and Brian showed up on Wednesday. I mean, and literally that was the turning point of my life, because I decided to hitch my wagon to the Brian De Palma train and leave behind Hammer Films and all of that, because they were sort of on the downswing. And so, and I'm actually writing, my current book that I'm writing is my De Palma years, and it picks up 3 days after this, I Was a Teenage Monster Hunter leaves off at that Famous Monsters Convention. So it's kind of a volume 2, and it's called Confessions of a Brian De Palma Protege, How I Shadowed the Director on The Fury, Dressed to Kill, and More. And it has a foreword that's being written by Nancy Allen. Anyway, that'll be coming out in August of this year. So then he goes, after I meet him, he goes and he makes Carrie. It turns out that casting sessions that were going on when I got him on the phone were the most important and famous casting sessions of the 20th century, because he and George Lucas were sitting at a table reading every actor in town for Star Wars and Carrie. And out of those sessions, we got Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, Sissy Spacek, Amy Irving, Nancy Allen, John Travolta, all of these amazing stars were discovered in front of that table with those two directors sitting there. It's just absolutely astonishing. But anyway, Carrie, of course, comes out, and Obsession comes out a month apart, because there was a delay in Obsession getting released. And it was a 1-2 punch. Obsession got rave reviews, did pretty well at the box office. And then a month later, Carrie opened and did even better, and got 2 Oscar nominations for Piper Laurie and for Sissy Spacek. And it really was the turning point of Brian De Palma becoming a major, major director. So his next film was going to be a big budget film for 20th Century Fox called Fury. And he was going to be shooting in Chicago in the summer of 1977, which was going to be between my junior and senior year in college. I now had his personal phone number, and I called him up and said, could I please come up during my summer break and work on The Fury? And he said, yes, absolutely. Come on up. So I did. And that's that's the first professional job I had, was working as his assistant that summer on The Fury. And that's with Kirk Douglas, John Cassavetes, Dennis Franz, and is one of his very, very early first films. He was actually from Chicago. They were just casting him as a local actor. Um, and Carrie Snodgrass had been Oscar nominated for Diary of a Mad Housewife, and Charles Durney, just this Amy Irving from Carrie. It had the most incredible cast. Um, and so that was amazing. Then I go back to school. He calls me in May, just as I'm about to graduate college, and said, "Hey, I'm going to be doing this low budget comedy called Home Movies this summer. I want you to come up and work on it. I know you're graduating and you need a job, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I go up there, and it's with Kirk Douglas, Nancy Allen, and Keith Gordon. And it's called, and also Garrett Graham, who was Beef and Phantom of the Paradise. And again, amazing cast. So I thought I was just going to be his assistant on that. And he said, "Well, it's very low budget, and I want you to be the associate producer and production manager." So he just kind of threw me into the deep end to see if I could swim. And apparently I passed muster. And then at the end of the summer, he asked me to be his full-time assistant, and he was sort of starting his own little development production company, and I was going to be, the reader of scripts and write script reports and do that kind of stuff. And I was like, fantastic. So I became his full-time assistant, and the first film that we ended up doing was Dressed to Kill. And so with that, I was involved in all of the pre-production, him storyboarding everything, having meetings, doing meetings with actors, all of the various people that ended up not in the film. The Angie Dickinson role. I went to deliver scripts to Jill Clayburgh and to Liv Ullman, who was in a Broadway show at the time. And it ended up, of course, being Angie Dickinson. The role of Keith Gordon, there were lots of young actors that were considered for that. And we had meetings with like Matt Dillon and different people. It was just, I was just in the middle of it all. And it was truly fantastic. During the shooting, they didn't want, I mean, it is a bit of a spoiler, but it's been, I don't know what, 40, 50 years. But Angie Dickinson is kind of like Janet Leigh getting killed in the shower scene in Psycho, within the first 30 minutes of the movie. Well, Angie Dickinson gets murdered in the elevator, in sort of a similar gimmick. And because you're not expecting, a big star to get bumped off so early in the movie. Well, they didn't
Right.
want photos to get out of her all bloody in the elevator and stuff. But I was determined. I was like, I have to get a picture of myself with her in that damn elevator with all the blood. And so when Brian was had his back turned or whatever, it was either the continuity person or it might have been the wardrobe person. They would take Polaroid pictures. That's how they would document stuff back then. And I said, "Quick, take a Polaroid of me and Angie." And I jumped in there and stood next to her and got this Polaroid, and kind of under the radar. And so that picture, of course, is just absolutely amazing. And I'll be able to send it to you so you can maybe post it. But that's obviously going to be a big full page of my De Palma book. I'm so proud of that picture. And anyway, it was great. And if you want to hear a funny story about Michael Caine, when he, again, it's a spoiler, he is a trans psycho killer. And when he finally appears in drag, when you actually see him, because you see this woman in shadows, and it actually a double playing him for a number of the stalking scenes, because you didn't want to give away that it was him. Um, but they would keep it shadowed and stuff, and big sunglasses and whatnot. And it was actually a woman who was playing him, And they had a prosthetic nose that was molded off of Michael Caine's nose and everything. So it would kind of approximate him in case people went back to look at the movie and say, hey, wait a minute, that's not him. But it did kind of look like him, but disguised enough. But when he actually had to actually appear and confront Nancy Allen in drag, he walked onto set in drag, and the crew and everybody was just, you could have heard a pin drop. Nobody knew what to say. They were afraid to laugh or it was a very intense moment.
Mhm.
And he knew he had to break the ice. And he said, unfortunately, I can't do an impersonation of his accent, but he suddenly just said in this dead silence, he said, well, I figured if I had been in the business long enough, I'd get to play me mum. And everybody cracked up laughing. It was the perfect thing to say. And from then on, it was like everything was fine. He was such a gentleman and so professional and loved all of the people on the set, all the crew and everybody. He was just consummate professional. And so was Kirk Douglas on The Fury. I'll tell you one quick story about him that that I've used forever. He walked onto set the first day, and he immediately started going around the room to all the crew members and introducing himself and asking their name and what they did. And after a bit, De Palma was like, Kirk, we got to get started here. And Kirk was like, hold on, just hold on. We've got time. And he would not let Brian stop him from literally introducing himself to everybody. Well, then the next day he came in and he went around the room and he had memorized every single person's name on the crew. And he was like, how you doing, Joe? How you doing, Jack? How you doing, Mo? And that crew fell in love with Kirk Douglas and would have done anything for that man. And he just was incredible. And I saw that, and I make sure that on my sets, when I direct, that I learn everybody's name. I go around and shake their hands and thank them at the end of every day, and I thank them by name. And because I saw how important that was. And when you're making a film, it's a family. I feel like there's no hierarchy, whether you're the director or the production assistant. Doesn't matter. We're all there because we love movies. We're living the dream. Let's have fun and let's be a family and let's make the best thing we possibly can, and don't phone it in and not treat it like it's just a paycheck. And that's what Kirk taught me. And it's really helped me tremendously in my career for sure.
Oh my gosh, I am enjoying this conversation with you so much. I can't even tell you how incredible this is. Um, it's very incredible. I wanted to just chat with you. You brought this movie up a little bit earlier at the first of our conversation. So you were a co-executive producer on the film Gods and Monsters,
Yeah.
and that was released in '98. And
Yes.
it explored the final days of the legendary James Whale. And I rewatched that just the other night. And what an emotional movie, a fantastic film.
Isn't it
Um,
beautiful? I'm so proud to have been a part of it. It was directed by Bill Condon, who
mm,
also wrote the adapted the book into a screenplay, and Bill won the Oscar that year for Best Adapted Screenplay. We're also proud that he did that. And it got other Oscar nominations. Ian McKellen was nominated for Best Actor. Lynn Redgrave, who played his housekeeper, got nominated for Best Supporting Actress, and she actually won the Golden Globe for that movie. Um, it was just the most amazing film, and in recreating that Bride of Frankenstein set for the flashback, just
mhm.
everything about it was magnificent. It also has Brendan Fraser, who's the other co-lead in it, who should have been nominated for an Oscar for it. But luckily, many years later, he won Best Actor for The Whale a couple of years ago. So he's
That's
got
right.
his Oscar now. And anyway, just a brilliant film. And of course, Bill Condon has gone on as a director and screenwriter to do, amazing work, from Chicago that he wrote the script for that won Best Picture, to Dreamgirls that he wrote and directed that won an Oscar for Jennifer Hudson. Um, and now he's just finished shooting uh, the an adaptation of the Broadway show, the Broadway musical of Kiss of the Spider Woman, and it stars Jennifer Lopez, and that'll be coming out later this year, I think.
Oh, wow. What was it like working with Ian McClellan? Like, what
Well,
was he like?
we back in those days, this is before X-Men and and all of his big, Lord of the Rings and all that. So he wasn't all that well known yet in America, particularly. I knew him as a big Shakespearean actor and had seen a couple of his films. He was really magnificent. And we were all I was expecting this very serious, very, well trained British actor to come over and do this little movie. And it couldn't have been more opposite. uh, and then with Brendan Fraser was known for comedies and stuff, and I thought Brendan Fraser was going to be the cut up and the jokester on set. Well, it was the exact opposite with both of them. Brendan was so intimidated and honored to be working with such a great actor as Ian McKellen that he was constantly alone in his trailer, learning his lines, taking everything dead serious, and really didn't want to, joke around with people or hang out on the set. He just, really was focused on doing the best job he possibly could as an actor. Whereas Ian was just having a marvelous time telling stories on set to everyone who would listen, and telling jokes and everything. And when it would come time to shoot the scene, he'd be in the middle of telling a joke to someone, and then they walked into the bar, and Bill Condon, the director, would go, Ian, we're ready to do the scene. Oh, hold on, darling, I haven't gotten to the punchline yet. And then, blah, blah, blah. And then, and finally, Bill would get frustrated, and he would say, "And here we go, we got to do this." And Ian would quickly get the punchline out, and then Bill would go, "Action." And Ian would turn on a dime and just snap right into character without hesitation and give the most brilliant performance. And it was just amazing to watch. But he just had a blast on set, and he loved people, loved talking to people, and was just so much funny and everything.
Yeah.
I ran into Ian. I went to see him in a play. Was it last? I guess it was um, December of 23. So not this past December, but the year before. And after the play, I went to the stage door and waited for him. I hadn't seen him since 1998, and he's gone on to do all these millions of incredible films and met thousands of people. I didn't know that he would even remember me at all. And he walked out of the door, and he kind of squinted his eyes and pointed at me, and he goes, "I know you." And I go, "Yes, I'm Sam Irvin. I was one of the producers on Gotham." And "Yes, of course. And your husband bleached my hair white for that film. And I remember the little house that you rented me. And what I loved about that house was that there was a little sign over the door that said, 'Thank you for pot smoking.' Now, isn't that wonderful?" And and that's how he is. He's just I couldn't believe that he remembered me. I mean, this is a gentleman of a certain age,
Mhm.
um, but his memory is sharp as a tack, and he, knew details, and it was incredible. Just such a sweet man. Love him to death.
Oh gosh, his performance was amazing. Brendan Fraser was amazing. That
Yes.
whole movie was emotional, and it it was lovely. I can't believe it took me so long in between watching that movie. Um, but I definitely really appreciate that. So I thank you for discussing this because it's an incredible movie.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sam, everybody remembers you. Vincent Price remembered you. Christopher Lee. I mean, they all remember you. So
I
you
didn't
got to feel
walk
good
up to
about
them
that.
with a red Captain Samoflauge mask on, but for some reason I'm memorable.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about working with the late David Scull, whom I got to know a little bit.
Oh,
He was a bit of a mentor
yes.
to me. I saw him at horror conventions, and he would give me great insights about horror films and really intricate details. And it's so sad that we lost him over a year ago in a car accident that should never have happened. Apparently, a drunk driver
Oh,
on the other end. So we lost
just
this great
terrible.
man,
And
but you had a chance to work with him on the documentary, The World of Gods and Monsters. Tell us about that.
well, I had been a fan of David Scull's books, um, and when we started to do Gods and Monsters, and we decided that I wanted to do a making of documentary, and we would shoot it while the movie was happening, so that we could interview each of the stars and the director and there was one other producer on the show that you might have heard of named Clyde Barker, and wanted to interview
Mm,
him on
yeah,
camera, but also delve into the history of James Whale, and to talk to anybody who was still alive that had worked with him or knew him. And the two people that we got were Gloria Stewart, who everybody, of course, knows as the older
mm,
woman in Titanic, but she was the female lead in The Old Dark House, which was directed by James Whale, and also
yeah.
The Invisible Man. In fact, in The Invisible Man that James Whale directed, she gets top billing above Claude Rains, because Claude Rains wasn't as well known in 1933. Anyway, she was an amazing interview and everything. But so wanting to do this documentary, and we knew it was going to be like for an extra on the DVD, that sort of thing. I got in touch with David Scull and I said, "Would you help me with this? Because you're an expert on James Whale, and you know Curtis Harrington, who was a very close friend of James Whale, and let's get him on camera to do the interview." And David was like, "Oh, this is all great." And so we sort of collaborated on this documentary, and I was able to, give him access of being on set and whatnot, and that's how we got to know each other, and it was so much fun working on that project. And you can still see it, I think, anytime they release Gods and Monsters on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, that documentary is always included. um, but we stayed friends over the years, and saw each other occasionally. And then last summer, let's see, I guess it was um, not summer of 23. I was finishing up my book. It's called The Epic Saga
Yeah.
Behind Frankenstein, the True Story, which is a little pamphlet that is 400 pages with 1,500 photos on the making of a favorite Frankenstein film of mine called Frankenstein, the True Story. It was a two-part NBC movie in 1973. And I'm just a super fan of the movie. But I got Anne Rice to write the foreword and Guillermo del Toro to write the afterword. It's because it's one of their favorite, this is one of their favorite movies as well. Anyway, I got in touch with David again because I needed to check some facts about different historical things in that, of the various stuff that I was talking about in the early years of other Frankenstein films and whatnot. And did a little research for me, and I quote him several times in the book. And then we were going to we were scheduled to both be guests at Pensacon in Pensacola, Florida in February of last year. And we were both like, "Oh, this is great. We'll go out to dinner and hang out. This will be really fun to spend some time together." And and then of course the tragedy happened on New Year's in the early hours of New Year's Day, I guess. And it was just this senseless, horrific car accident where he got struck by a drunk driver, which is one of the reasons why I'm afraid to even go out on this road on New Year's Eve. I always stay at home, and I wish, in retrospect, that David had done the same. His husband was also in the car, and he was injured terribly as well, but didn't die right away, but died about a month later from complications of that accident. So it actually killed both of them, and it's just, oh God, I'm getting choked up. It was just, just a horrible, horrible way for him to go, and we all miss him. And he was a magnificent um, historian. He was a magnificent person, and wanted to help anybody and everybody with making sure that of the accuracy and the details of whatever they were writing. He was always there to help. And
Yeah.
anyway, it's just a terrible, terrible loss. I was really happy that the Rondo Awards named an award after David, and I guess for to recognize people who are great historians and that sort of thing. And then he won an award posthumously for one of his projects, one of his book projects, I think. And but yeah, we all miss him. I just think he's such a great guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Terrible loss. We haven't really fully recovered it. Thankfully, we've got, people like yourself, historians like Greg Mank, who we've just had on the show. There's lots of other great writers too. We've had some on this program, Gary Don Rhodes, and in some ways, I guess they're trying to pick up the slack from where David left, and doing their best to do exactly that. We have just a few more minutes with our guest, the wonderful Sam Irvin. I know Tracy wanted to ask a question, then I'll wrap it up with a couple of questions. Tracy, go right ahead.
Oh my goodness. I have so many, but I'll limit it to just one more. Let me see. Oh my gosh. I have a ton here. Would you like to share with us, just because I've been just scrolling through your Instagram, and can you just talk to us a little bit about your ventures at WonderCon that you just recently went to, and just a couple of little fan interactions that you might have had?
Well, I love going to conventions. They're so much fun. And it was my first time at WonderCon. I didn't have a table or anything there. It's a really big, big convention, and if they don't invite you as a guest and give you a free table, the tables they're just too expensive. But I did get invited to sign books for an hour at Prism Comics, which is a queer comic company. And so I did that. It was really fun. And I dressed as Captain Samoflauge, cosplaying it up to the hilt, and, selling copies of my Captain Samoflauge book and my other books and everything. It was great fun. And then I was on a panel discussion that was moderated by Sean Abley, who wrote a book called Queer Horror, a film guide, which is a huge 500-page historical book, encyclopedia, really, on all queer horror films, and giving capsule reviews and stuff. And lots of different writers contributed to it. Anyway, he organized this panel discussion with me and a few other people, and it was so much fun. It was great. I love going to these kinds of conventions. I usually go to Wonderfest every year, and I'll be going to that at the end of May. That's in Louisville, Kentucky, and they also have the Rondo Award ceremony there. Um, and the Rondo Awards will be announced ahead of time. So if people have won, they have a chance to make arrangements to come to the ceremony. It's really fun. Um, and I think we met actually at the Monster Bash convention a few years ago outside of Pittsburgh in Mars, Pennsylvania. They've moved that one to another suburb. I'm very disappointed about that because I love telling people that I'm going to Mars. And I even had my cartoonist, Dan Gallagher, who did the artwork for my Captain Samoflauge book. I had him do a poster for my appearance at that convention, and we did a spoof poster there was a movie called Flash Gordon's Trip to Mars, and we called it Flashy Sam's Trip to Mars, and had me sort of as Flash Gordon, and it was kind of an early iteration of what became Captain Samoflauge, and we made blow-ups of the poster and kind of sold those at my table, and it was loads of fun. But I adore interacting with my fans. On my social media, I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I love Facebook the most because I have no limitations on how much text I can have. And if you hadn't noticed, I'm a little long-winded. And so one of my followers said on social media, "Oh, you should have a name for your followers. Like Lady Gaga has the Little Monsters, and Barry Manilow has the Fanilows, and the Grateful Dead had the Deadheads." And I said, "Oh, my favorite name for those is Benedict Cumberbatch. His fans are called Cumber Bitches." And that always cracks me up. And so I turned it into a little contest, and I said, "All right. I mean, I'm not, I'm doing this tongue in cheek. I'm a legend in my own mind, but we can have fun with it. Why not?" So everybody submit names, and whatever one strikes my fancy, that's what we'll go with. Well, somebody then came up with the name Samwitches, and I thought that was hilarious. And they spelled witches Witches because of my horror cred. And so I just love that. So I call my followers sandwiches. So if you start following me, you're an official sandwich. And then I named my publishing imprint Knuckle Sandwich Books. So that's the publisher of all of my books. And so I just lean into it and have fun.
Oh my gosh. It was awesome to see all your pictures and read through some of your stories that you were posting on Instagram. I was following you that whole weekend.
Oh, that's so cool.
Oh my
I always
gosh.
take pictures. I always especially now that I'm a self-proclaimed superhero darling.
Yeah.
And especially at a convention like WonderCon where there's so many people cosplaying as superheroes. I was like, well, I have to pose with every one of my cohorts of other superheroes. So anytime anybody I saw that was dressed as a superhero, I was like, I gotta get a picture with you, Superman, with Wonder Woman, with all the different ones. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved it.
And by the way, I'm working on a sequel.
Sam, final question for me.
Yes.
No, go right ahead. I was going to ask what's next for you.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. It's the De Palma book that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Confessions of a Brian De Palma Protege. That'll be coming out in August. And then next year in 2026, I'll have the second of the Captain Samoflauge little parody storybooks. And I'll let you know the name of the next one is the first one was Captain Samoflauge and the Frankensam Scam. And the next one is going to be Captain Samoflauge and the Vampire Space Case. And So it'll involve vampires. I actually will be playing 3 parts in that as well. I'll be playing Director Sam. I will be playing Captain Samoflauge, of course, but I will be acting in my own film as Count Samula.
I love it.
Nice.
And somehow, I won't tell you how, we end up in outer space.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Sam,
No,
do you have
it
any
doesn't.
plans to direct again?
I do. I've directed about 55 movies now, and my latest one was it was a Lifetime thriller called Murder in the Desert, and it was premiered last fall on Lifetime and it kicked off their whole fall season and did extremely well in the ratings and all, which I was very proud of. And I'm
Great.
just waiting for the next assignment. You know what it's like freelancing,
Yeah.
you're waiting for the phone to ring. But that'll happen. There's actually a couple of rumblings. There's even a vampire movie that I'm supposed to direct, and just waiting to hear when.
Nice.
Oh, wow. I'll be watching for it.
Thank you.
I hope that works out. That sounds great. Yeah. Yeah. As we wrap things up with Sam Irvin, want to mention again, Sam's nominated for a Rondo Award for this year for Best Graphic Arts Presentation. If you have the ballot, it's category 22, and the nomination is for the book Captain Samoflauge and the Frankensam Scam. By the way, to vote for the Rondos, go to their website, rondoaward.com. You then can cut and paste the ballot into an email. Make your choices. If you want to vote for Sam, go to category 22. And then once you've filled that out, you don't have to do the whole ballot. Just do the parts that you're interested in. And then you can mail it to taraco@aol.com. And that's TARACO@AOL.com. And we certainly hope that Sam gets a lot of support in the voting. Our guest, again, has been prolific man from horror, Renaissance man, Sam Irvin, filmmaker, writer, producer, all-around expert on the genre. Sam, it's been great. We really appreciate your time. I know we've only scratched the surface of your many experiences. We'd love to have you back here on the Ghostly Gallery. It's been a real privilege for us.
Oh, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Our thanks to Sam Irvin. Of course, thanks as always to Tracy, our wonderful co-host and producer. We thank all of you listeners for joining us in this Museum of the Macabre. And we do hope we'll see you again next time right here in the Ghostly Gallery.
Bye-bye.